If you are just joining us, I'm Lauren Van Hemert from RDU on Stage, and I am here with the very handsome. I just love your
Oh,
vibe. You're like radiating positivity and just
thanks.
smile. And so I'm here with Sam Hamashima, playwright, actor, and a neighbor because we're both here in
Yeah,
North Carolina and Cary.
yes,
So
yes.
so a lot of the folks who are interviewing with me, we'll get the pandemic stuff out of the way, and we're going to touch on it a little bit later from xenophobia, hate speech
Right,
standpoint. I do want to talk about that, but
absolutely.
where are you quarantining? I think people will be happy to know.
Yeah. So I'm quarantining in Cary, North Carolina.
Yay!
Yes. So that's where I grew up. I'm at my family's house. I came from New York City, um, and it was before everything happened. Um, and it was, you know, it was just something I had to do, you know.
Well, and what was the mood like when you were leaving? Were people still kind of feeling like not a big deal, it's going to last a couple weeks? Or were people like beginning to feel the weightiness of it?
Well, so it was really interesting, Lauren, because I remember going to get a prescription at the CVS by my apartment in New York, like the 11th. And there was somebody, and the line, it was such a long line, like it was crowded, because we were all just like, we're doing our thing. Um, and there was this one person, and they had a mask on and like gloves, and they were just really, they were what normal is now. And at that time, we were all like, what's going on? Like this person is like really overreacting. But like now thinking back on it, I'm like, you were probably one of the people who was the safest at that point. For me, I like I wasn't. I knew it was a problem, but I didn't know like to the degree it would get to. I left Friday the 13th of March, and I got the flight the day beforehand, and it was $30, which was like crazy to me. I'd never seen that before. It was more expensive to get to the airport. And so I'm driving, I'm not driving, someone else is driving, but we're going. And then there's an intersection and there's a bunch of police. And I'm like, this is the part of the movie where I see someone running around, like eating someone's face, cause I was like, I was too late. But so we get to the airport and the airport's a ghost town. There's nobody there. And really it felt like the last flight out. Like, if I'm going to be honest, we got on the plane, and for me, I mean, hindsight is 2020. So I can think about how like the lack of gloves I had, the lack of masks I had. I got here and I changed clothes and I like quarantined for a little bit, but not 14 days. And then everything was fine, but it could have so turned out the opposite way. So I'm really lucky, because I have heard of like kind of horror stories of like bring somebody bringing it to wherever they went, and that was scary. I think right before I left, no one really knew how this was going to go. I know that when I got here and the news just started happening and everything sort of blew up, for me, I was like, oh my gosh, this isn't going to be like the 2 weeks I thought it was going to be, which is hilarious that I've ever thought that. Because I packed small. I was like, oh yeah, this is going to be like 2 weeks. I'm just trying to get out just to, like, so I'm not like a body in a crowded city, you know. But so I had a friend come from New York to North Carolina, and I think it hit everybody in a different way of like how serious this was, and like she was still in that moment of like, this isn't so serious. And she texted me and she was like, hey, I'm back, let's go get brunch. And at that point, like I was just so upset because I had figured out the reality, and I was just like, girl, this is not a thing to get brunch about. Like, we can't go, you know. I think like it's affected all of us in different ways. My mom owns a small business, and she's actually having to close her doors, after 31 years. So it's like nobody planned for this.
No one
And
knew. I mean, how could you plan? It's not that people
yeah,
were irresponsible because they didn't plan. How? I mean, if somebody had come to you a year ago and said, "Hey, I'm sorry, you got to plan for a global pandemic that's happening a year from now," everyone would have been like, "Yeah, no, you're
Yeah,
crazy."
yeah,
So it's not. It's something I think none of us could imagine. And
yeah,
now going forward, you know, my husband and I were walking today, and we were watching some kids play in our neighborhood from you know, just in their front yard,
right.
social distancing, everything was safe. But my husband said it's weird that social distance is going to be even in their vocabulary. That's something we didn't say 3 months ago.
Right.
Like
Yeah, no, yeah.
all these new words and language, and I'm sure being a playwright you're just soaking it all in.
Yeah, I mean, that's been the craziest thing is sort of looking at this like as a writer. And I talked with this playwright David Henry Hwang, and he was telling me how it. Oh, I love him. I love him so much. I'm such a fan. But he was
He's
telling
my
me how
favorite. I met
I'm
him in
obsessed.
November, and he's just the nicest human being. I mean, aside from being a great playwright, he's
Yeah,
just an amazing human being.
yeah, and yeah. I mean, I fell in love with his writing the minute I started, freshman year of college. But he was talking to me about how writers we tend to write about things after they happen, and it's always sort of in retrospect. And this is one of the few moments in a writer's life where a major event is happening for such a long period of time that we are writing about it as we're going through it. And that to me was something that was hard for me to grasp at first, but it makes perfect sense. Like right now I'm looking at sort of what's going on outside and how people are banging pots and pans at 7 o'clock in New York City. And there is theater happening around us. It's just happening in much different ways. And as a writer, I mean, if I were to have written this, somebody would have taken the script and been like, oh, that'll never happen. Like, oh, that's fiction. And like, for me, who reads a lot of news scripts, if I had found this script of right now, I would be like, oh, that's farce. That's absurdist. And it's like you really can't make this stuff up.
Well, there's so much to chat with you about, but let's start at Green Hope High School. Let's go back in time.
Okay.
You won Triangle Rising Stars, which is amazing. So I'm guessing as
Thank
best
you.
actor you went on to the Jimmys, right? Did you
Yes.
go to the Jimmy Awards? Um,
Yeah.
how did your theater experiences in high school and on our triangle stages, not just at Green Hope, but I know you did the stuff at Interact and other places. So, how did those theater experiences here in the triangle kind of inform who you became as an artist or who you've become as an artist?
hmm So as you said, I did a few things, and I started with community theater, and so for me that has stayed with me for my 24 years of life now of just how theater is so community based. Um, that's why I write. I want to write for people, and I want to bring people together. Um, I started really performing in high school, right at Green Hope, and I was in choir with Maggie Cook, and then I was part of the theater program with Jamie Gorski, and they were really looking at material for us that was challenging. My junior year, I was in Into the Woods, the Sondheim musical, and that for me was like a huge. It blew my mind because I was like, oh my gosh, all these like classic characters and like crazy stuff happens and like morality and like what is real. And I hadn't known that musicals could do such a thing. And for me, that was really exciting. And I know that because of that one musical, it really made me dive into theater in a specific way of what's in the writing.
Mhm.
And so even while I was a performer, I really was thinking in terms of the writing. What is the intention of the writer here? how does it all fit together? What are the patterns, and even I was in Little Shop at InterACT, Interact, and that's, oh my God, that show was so fun. It's also such an incredibly written show. And I think, I was just really fortunate to be surrounded by such good material in my younger high school years. I also think, I'm Asian American, and being a baker in Into the Woods who was Asian American, and being a Seymour who was Asian American, like that doesn't really happen every day. And so for me, it really made me feel like what I was doing was possible, and what I was doing, I could do too. Even though I hadn't seen many people that looked like me doing it elsewhere, I was being believed in, by InterACT, by Green Oak High School, by Raleigh Little Theater, and Applause Cara Youth Theater. They were really supporting me, and they weren't just being like, "Oh, who's this like Asian kid?" And I think like that's actually informed a lot of like my writing and my work of like, no, there is a seat at the table for me, because all of these mentors and people from my hometown, they let me sit at the table, you know. And so yeah, it's really transformed who I am, and has really made me think about everything in a writing way. I actually never intended to be a writer, but I started wanting to be as I was in college at the University of Michigan.
Okay,
Um,
stop there because we're going to
uh,
get to that.
okay, okay.
And I'm not trying to, I want to get to that because that's really interesting to me too. But before we leave the triangle
Yes,
and go to Ann Arbor, where it's super cold all the time,
so cool. I'd never seen so much snow in my life.
um, before we do that, do you feel like when it comes to representation and inclusion on stage, that community theaters, like, I mean, obviously in high school they're working with the students they have, and I think high schools are really
Hmm.
bold when it comes to casting choices. So I
Yeah.
love what the high schools are doing. But do you think our community stages and regional stages, not just in the Triangle, but in Seattle and DC and all these other places, are more progressive in representation on stage and making color conscientious casting choices and representing people on stage than your mainstream stages on Broadway in New York and stuff?
Wow, that's a really good question. Um, I would say that they're doing, I think theater is very regional. I think you really have to look at it as these conversations that are happening regionally. And what Seattle is doing may not be what North Carolina is doing. I think Seattle, they have a huge Asian American population, and their history with the Japanese American internment and such other moments in history is informing the works that are being put on.
Mm.
That being said, like I'm also Asian and I'm from North Carolina. And so, would it be awesome for me to be able to see work like that in North Carolina? Absolutely. But I'm not surprised, if that makes sense. I think in terms of diversity on our regional stages, I think we're actually doing really well, if not actually better than Broadway. I think
Mm.
regional theater really taking chances. And I mean, that's where new work starts. When a show gets to Broadway, it's been through so many things. And so I think like the commercialism of Broadway sort of holds it back in a sense. Not saying everything on Broadway is like commercial, but I think that there's this huge push on Broadway to have these sort of mainstream voices on stage, and representation is not as big of a deal. I mean, of course, that being said, you look at the people of color in Mean Girls, and you look at the casting choices in Dear Evan Hansen. There are, I mean, Hadestown, hello. It's like there are all of these incredible shows that are happening on Broadway. And I think the the I think the thing with diversity on Broadway is that the writing needs to be more diverse. I don't know if it's necessarily the casting. I think casting is going really well. And I think like actors equity and the people involved are trying really hard to make sure that there is equity. But I think in terms of the stories we're telling, that is something that can be more diverse. And I think regional theaters have more of a habit of hiring new playwrights and to take a chance like that, And so in doing so, I think their stories are inherently more diverse.
And you mentioned David Henry Wang, who honestly one of my favorite playwrights. I
Yeah.
love M. Butterfly. I thought was
Oh,
brilliant. If you haven't seen M. Butterfly, you gotta read the script. It's just brilliant.
so
But
good.
he's had amazing success with Soft Power. It closed at the public. It was playing off Broadway when I was there last fall.
Did you see it?
I saw this sounds terrible. I saw Act One and got
Oh,
sick
okay.
at intermission and had
You
to
got
leave.
sick?
I was sick at intermission and I was like, I have to leave. I have to, otherwise I'm
Yeah,
gonna be
I
sick.
get it.
Beautiful theater.
It happens.
So it's one of the few times I left and I so regretted that I didn't ever get to see the end of it because the part I saw was brilliant. And now it's getting a lot of accolades and awards. So do you think that the success of a play like Soft Power, which I hope will find its way to Broadway when everything reopens, um, will open the door to more Asian and Asian American playwrights? Because it's a wonderful book and script and lyrics by just beautiful
Yeah,
music.
I do. I think like the doors are opening, and I think we just have to push harder. I think like that is we just can't be relaxed about it. I think we need to be very insistent that these stories that are created are good and are worth something. Soft power. I don't know the development history specifically of soft power, but I know that that wasn't just created overnight. So it all starts with an idea, and it starts with one producer taking a chance. And I think that's sort of what we all have to recognize. And precedent is set. Look at what soft power has done and how many lives it's changed. And like I loved it so much, and I really wanted to go to Broadway. And you also have playwrights that are doing amazing things. I mean, look at like Celine Song at New York Theater Workshop with Endlings, and then look at Straight White Men. There are all of these Asian American voices right now, and people are listening, and it's like really exciting to kind of see how people are responding to these works.
I love that. Well, and I will, this kind of has jogged my memory. I haven't been on it too much today. I've just been in a fog, but
It's
I'm
quarantine
going
though.
to say, I'm going to share the Soft Power playlist with everybody on Facebook,
Yes.
on Instagram, because they just came out with their soundtrack or their cast album. And I think it's so much fun. So we'll show them some love too, because it's so much fun. All right. So now you're at the University of Michigan. You're going for a degree in musical theater.
Go blue.
Go blue. Mm-hmm. Really cold. But
aside
from all that, is it true that you had a professor laugh at you when you told him that you wanted to write plays that would change the world?
Yeah, it's true.
So at what point in college does it occur to you, I think I want to write plays?
Junior year of college. Freshman year, I took a poetry class and I loved it. And, I started writing poetry. But then junior year, I believe that, 2016, it was actually during the election, President Trump's election. And for me, I was just really worried about the rhetoric that was going around on both sides about and how aggressive people were being. There was some talks about, minority groups, and that was scary to me because it was very, it paralleled to a degree to what my family went through in the 1940s. with the anti-Asian sentiment. And I just didn't feel like anybody was comparing these two things. And I also didn't feel like my voice was being heard as a writer or as a performer. Junior year, I felt like, I can do the King and I sides. Like, I know how to do that. Like, I've got all that stuff down, but I want more. I want there to be people who are like literally me, who are like bopping around and like having a good time, and who wash rice, but they don't speak Japanese. It's like, where are those characters? And there was always sort of this talk of like, well, it's the writers, like the writers have to figure it out. And like, we just have to like wait. And like the writers need to do it. And like, and for me, I was just really frustrated because I was like, okay, honey, like I go to a really good school for musical theater and you're going to tell me I just have to sit and wait, like I just have to like wait around for the next incredible thing to happen. And that to me was really frustrating. And I mean, I guess I like did what my professors were telling me to do, which was don't wait for the writers, write it yourself, or I became a writer in that moment and I fulfilled that. But so for me, it was from the frustration of the lack of material that connected with me. I think there's so many musicals where the Asian characters are sort of the backdrops. Like you look at Miss Saigon, where it's just we're running around, like that's kind of what we're doing, and then Kim dies. Spoiler alert. But and for me, I was like, well, like I don't want to have to be in The King and I all my life. I don't want to have to be in Miss Saigon all my life. And like, Flower Drum Song is cute, but like it's not everything. And like, we need more, And when I was in sophomore year, I think it was Allegiance that was on Broadway, and that was a huge show for me, really inspiring. Because my whole life, Japanese American imprisonment has been a huge part of my narrative. And learning about it and seeing it transferred on stage was huge for me. It showed me sort of what was possible with musicals, just like Into the Woods did back in high school. And for me, I wanted that. I wanted that material. And it didn't feel like musical theater in general was going in that direction, for me. And that was frustrating for me because I wanted that. I wanted more material like that, and then I think also when Hamilton came out, that kind of changed the game. Mm-hmm. I remember when that came out because it was like, it shook the world. Hamilton shook the world. Like the musical theater schools were freaking out because we were all like, oh my God, what's going on? And it also changed everything in terms of like what was being taught, because now we're doing hip hop dance and now we're learning how to sing pop songs, And so for me, I was like, well, if you write something and it's successful, it like the world will change, like everyone will start to adapt with it. So like, why don't we try to push those barriers? So that's how I started to write. I just wanted to be heard. I think a lot of people start to write when they don't feel like their voice is reaching someone, and they have to refine it and they have to cultivate it. I saw this cartoon, and it's about, it's like kind of the next year sort of thing. And there's this one guy and he's like, oh, like, I'm so sad. Like 2017 is going to be terrible. And the other guy was like, no, it's not. And then the negative guy is like, how do you know? And then the other guy is like, well, there's going to be flowers. And the other one was like, well, how do you know? And the other one's like, well, I'm going to plant them. And so that to me actually was a huge moment when I saw that, because I was like, I just need to make my own work. Like, I just need to start making stuff and creating. And like, it's not going to be good all the time, but it's not going to be bad all the time. And that's, I think, how you just keep going. You just have to just keep creating and keep making more.
And if you think about artists like Lin-Manuel Miranda, Hamilton, In the Heights, that's, I think, why he started writing too. He wanted to see himself being represented on stage, not just in, stereotypical roles. So
yeah.
We have a question, and I think her question is kind of where my next question is going. I read in American Theater Magazine that you said you were afraid to be a writer because of the way your brain kind of works. You think in spoken word, you think in Japanese anime. Her question was, could you talk about your references to Pokemon and other pop culture references for younger audiences? So, what was it that you were fearful of, like in terms of how your brain was thinking or operating, and what you might be able to put on the page?
Mhm. Well, for me, so yes, I love video games, I love anime, and I use that in all my work because that's how I found my Asian American identity. And so that's just like how I think, and I was afraid because if you're being different and like you're writing different stuff, you're not always going to find someone who appreciates the difference or knows what to do with it. Like I remember when we were workshopping the first show, like I was like, yeah, and so like this is a whole anime thing and blah blah blah, and people were like, like okay, because like no one really knew what I was talking about. But then when we workshopped it in DC, I was paired up with this director, Natsuo Noda Power, and she was gonna be like a Japanese manga cartoonist, like, and so she knew exactly what I was talking about. And that for me was when I was like, wow, not so different after all. Like there's someone out there that's like connect with this. And so at the beginning, I thought my difference was going to alienate me and was going to sort of turn people away. But actually, the difference and sort of the, I don't know, spiciness of like manga and anime and all that cartoon stuff actually brought people in because they were like, this is different. This is dynamic. Like, what's going on here? And, in doing so, I can also reach out to younger audiences, which is like a huge, like, part of like something I want to do is I just want to like make sure young people, especially young Asian Americans, can see the work I'm putting on.
Well, and let's talk about that for a second because I have two children and I have suffered through some really terrible children's theater. I've also
Mm-hmm.
seen some really cutting edge, very cool, um, what would be categorized as theater for young audiences. So,
Mm-hmm.
as a playwright and as a young person, I mean, obviously you're not a child, but you are still pretty young in your career.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you see theater for young audiences going in this country? And where does it fit into the canon of theater? Can we make it
Young
edgy
people,
for them? Can we get away from fables? I mean, there are high schools doing Spring Awakening. I think if a high school can do Spring Awakening,
yeah,
you don't need to see Peter Rabbit in middle school.
I
Or
agree. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think when I'm writing for kids, I think about what I would have wanted to see when I was that age, and it's like, I think when you're in middle school and like when you're a kid, you go through a lot of stuff, like I went through a lot of crazy stuff when I was in middle school. And so for me, if me, a middle schooler, am going to go see a rabbit show, I'm not going to connect with it because my life is crazy. Like to me, my life is crazy. And so I think the more we treat them like adults within our writing and within theater, the more they're going to respond. I think so many kids want to interact with the pieces. And so that's what I'm trying to do the most with my TYA pieces is have this interaction between audience and actor. Because I don't want just to perform at them. I really want them to be involved because that's
mm,
like sort of how you pique the interest. And they also, you know, they're not adults. Like that's something I have to emphasize because they're not adults. And so it's like we can write for them in a way that's it's like, the have your cake and eat it too. Treat them like adults, but don't treat them like adults. You know what I mean? And I think we can do that with our writing. We can give them complexity, and we can give them nuance and excitement, but we're not just going to perform it at them. They're kids. So bring them along the journey, you know?
I love that. So kind of what I read in your timeline. So you go to Michigan, the teacher kind of tells you, no, you can't be a writer. You can't change the world. You've got to get an MFA for
I'm
that.
very idealistic. Yeah.
and and you're just like, no, not going to happen. And is it right after that that you graduated and went to Seattle? Is that when you take this trip to Seattle? That it sounds like that first reading in Seattle was very like a catharsis for you.
Yes.
So
Yeah. So I graduate from Michigan. The first thing that actually happens is American Spies, my first show, gets workshopped at the Kennedy Center.
yes.
And so I go to the Kennedy Center with that show and we workshop. It's like, that was a huge moment for me of being like, whoa, I'm here. I'm at this living monument and I'm doing work. I'm doing work about my family into these camps by the hands of the government that is funding this monument. It was just a huge moment for me. Also, my sister is an actress and she was in that reading, which is like the coolest thing. And so that play, really started to form and take root. And that was when I was just really so much more like, no, I am a writer, like I can do this. Then Seattle happened, and Seattle was a completely different play. Seattle, the play is supposed home, and it is dealing with the Japanese American concentration camp experience, but it is happening during 3 separate timelines. So you have somebody in her youth, you have the same person in her older years, and then you have the grandson. And I kind of weave them together in sort of a friendship bracelet way to make sort of this spoken word theatrical piece. So I brought that to Seattle. This is Seattle Public Theater's Emerald Prize, which I like had no idea I was going to get. Like, that was crazy. Because, it shows up in my inbox and they're like, hey, you're invited to submit. You've been identified as a playwright. And I was like, okay, yeah, I'm a playwright. And so they were like, send us your stuff. And I was like, okay, what? So it was very much like a fake it till you make it thing, Lauren, where I was like, okay, I have to submit them a 1-page like pitch. I have to send them a little character description. I have to send them the first 10 pages. And then I send that, and then they send back, and they're like, okay, can you send a little bit more? So then, I send a little bit more, and they go, okay, can you send a little bit more? There are now 10 of you. And I was like, what? And so, send a little bit more. And then they're like, okay, there's 5 of you now, and now you have an interview. And I was like, wait, I'm just like a 20, how old is that? I'm just a 23-year-old, and I like lost my water bottle yesterday. Like, I don't know if I can do this, And so I had this interview, and I talked to them about my play, and I was just like, okay, Sam, like, you can't, no imposter syndrome. You have to sit down and you have to be a playwright because that's what you are. And so I did that. And then they invited me, and they told me that I got the Emerald Prize, which was huge. I mean, this is a $10,000 award, which for me, I got to sign a lease in New York City because of that. Like, that money went to my life. And I'm so grateful to Seattle Public for that. So I go to Seattle with this play, and we have this workshop. And as I'm there, Seattle Public Theater takes me to the Japanese American Museum. They take me to this certain hotel, the Panama Hotel, where in the basement are all these Japanese American suitcases and trunks that have never been claimed. And I'm seeing this history that has involved my family. And this is my first time really being in a community where I'm not the expert in the room, where I'm not the one who knows the most about it. And that to me was so liberating. Someone in our cast, he had just retired as the head of Asian American Studies at University of Washington. Like, I was sparring about the ideals of Japanese American concentration camps with this expert. And that to me, it was a research opportunity as well, And so while I'm there, I'm learning all about this history around me while writing this play. And then we get to the reading, and there's so many people there. And like, I didn't expect that. I also was like highly caffeinated and exhausted, so I wasn't even thinking about that. But like, the Asian American community of Seattle came together, came to see this show, and this show, in addition to having these like 3 timelines, there's an evil snake that has shed its skin too many times, and that's sort of a metaphor for assimilation, right? You have this Japanese spirit who's helping this girl get through her concentration camp experience. It's very animated, and there's very much the heroine's journey going on. And so there were kids in the audience, and it was so cool seeing the Asian kids, and they were like, oh my God, like there's people on stage like me, and they were so quiet. And they were just attentive. They were like with the material. And that to me was huge, because if I had seen material like this when I was little, I would have just been so happy. It would have stuck with me. There's a moment in the show where, there's this thing called the Asian glow, where not all Asians, but some Asians lack an enzyme that digests alcohol. And so when we drink alcohol, we blush. And it's not a terrible thing, but sometimes people make fun of you for it, and you're just like, don't make fun of me for that. Like that's not why I'm here. And so, I've put makeup on in the past whenever I go to a party or something, because I don't want to be made fun of. And so I wanted to use that in my show somehow to sort of reclaim it in a sense. And so, she has to light up the snake cave, and she takes this big bottle of sake and she starts to drink it. And she's like, well, I'm going to glow, right? That's how it works. And there's a talking cactus that's with her. And the talking cactus is like, that's not real. And she's like, yeah, it is. I'm going to do it. And so she drinks it, and then she starts glowing red. And let me tell you, heaven is that little slice of a moment where I saw parents looking at each other and laughing, and kids looking at each other and laughing right in that moment. Because everyone had a different experience with that joke and with that scene, but it was all positive. And I think like that's what was exciting to me, is like thinking, did a kid like leave that night and ask their parents like, do I really glow when I drink? It's like stuff like that that makes me excited for theater and what it can do for a community.
Well, and for theater for young audiences, those are the moments that makes for a very rich theatrical experience, not just for your children, but for you.
Yeah.
Well, it's not torture to sit there and watch the show.
Yeah.
With,
Yeah.
So did you move to Seattle, or did you stay based in, I mean, I know you still have the apartment in New York. So where were you based? Did you decide to move to Seattle? Did you relocate there, or did you return back to New York?
I returned back to New York.
You did.
So I was in Seattle for about a week. And then I returned to New York. And I lived there, worked there.
And so much of your material, it sounds like, is rooted in your family's history and your family's heritage. And so talk to me about how difficult it is to write personal stories, because you're not, like reimagining some alternative universe. These are very personal stories for you.
Right. So I think when you're approaching writing your own personal stories, you also have to take into consideration how you're viewing the audience. For me, I find the audience to be generous. I find the audience to be caring and to be nurturing. And because of that, I'm not afraid to write what I write and put it out there. That's the first step for me, is acknowledging that the people who are coming to see this are coming to see it to get something out of it and to support it.
So we're talking about telling your family stories, telling your personal stories.
Yeah.
How emotional is that for you? And I guess, how emotional is it for your family when they're coming to see it? Or when your sister, when she's acting in it, if she gets the opportunity.
Yeah. I think it's very emotional. I think there's so much, it takes a toll on you. When I finished, when my show was going up in DC, I actually had to go to urgent care because I was just so dehydrated. I wasn't taking care of myself, because I was just so adamant that like I need this show to be what I need it to be for my family, you know, because you start to feel like there's something higher than you making this happen. You're part of something bigger. And I also, that is kind of why I write what I write, because I do feel like I'm part of something bigger. And it's important to me that I get these stories on paper so that, you know, my grandchildren will know what my grandparents went through, you know. For my family, you know, so I'm sort of the one in my family that is researching, and like that's really, I've got all the documents. You know, and it's funny because like my aunt and my uncle, they're now starting to send me things that they have. They're like, oh yeah, like we have this letter that your grandfather wrote his brother during World War II. Maybe you want that, you know? And it's like, I'm just starting to gather all these things. And in doing so, they're providing me more things to write, you know? And I love that. I love that I'm getting them interested in the history. Um, I think like my dad, he didn't find out about Japanese American internment until he was 23. Um, and I'm 24. I found out when I was 13. And so I think about what if a decade had passed where I just hadn't known about this, you know, and that's like really sad to not know your history like that. And you know, he does now, and he's so enthusiastic about my work. And I think that's the coolest thing, is that my family is really supportive about me, you know, going after this and working like this, and you know, writing our story.
Mm. So you wrote on your Instagram page, I think it was right around Friday the 13th, that you were afraid of COVID-19, but you were more afraid of people acting, quote, freaking crazy and blaming people that looked like you. And you went on to say that even on normal days, you experienced racism, xenophobia in New York on the subway, and it's one of the reasons that you left. Um, I think, first of all, when we're watching the news and we hear these stories on the news, you're like, oh, that's an isolated incident. So, can
Mm-hmm.
you share what some of your experiences have been on the subway, or some of the hate speech that you've heard, or it's been directed at you? Because I think it's really easy to say, oh, it doesn't happen to anybody I know, or
Yeah.
you know what I mean? So, could
Yeah,
you
no,
do
absolutely.
that?
Yeah. I think, you know, some of these moments are like very personal. But one that like sticks out is, you know, it was probably when was that? I was on the subway, on the 2 train, and it was just me. The train was crowded, but there was me and this other Asian woman. And this guy was saying some really derogatory terms that are used against Asians. And he, you know, he was talking about how he was here first, and how, you know, how did you even get here? You know, did you swim here? You know, and he just kept saying these things over and over again. And it was obviously directed at us, you know, and that that's just like not productive. Like that's just not helpful, you know. And I've had other friends like talk to me about what they've gone through of people like not wanting to get near them when they go outside, of people like whispering to each other and avoiding them as they're shopping, you know. I think, you know, what Asian Americans and Asians were going through at the beginning of this, when we were calling it, you know, the Chinese virus or the Kung flu, that was that wasn't good. I think, you know, while we are still being treated as sort of these people who brought this, there's also a huge racial impact on Black and brown bodies in New York City. If you're looking at sort of the social distancing aspects, like in New York, you know, there are certain people who are being fined and putting in jail for this, and there are certain people who are being handed masks and given a free pass to keep social distancing on the Chelsea Street Pier, you know. And to me, you know, I can talk as much as I want about what the Asian Americans and the Asians are going through, But I think right now we all really need to unite, and we need to talk about the disparity between people of color and white people. When it's coming to social distancing and when it's coming to these policings, um, it's very difficult. And I did leave New York because to me, I was like, at the moment, that what was happening was scary. I hadn't rode the subway for 2 days because for me, I was just like, I'm not going to go outside. Like I'm like the subway. There's nothing like the New York subway, and I love it so much, and I hate it so much. And for me, I felt safer coming back home, being with my family, because I knew I didn't have to take public transportation. I would just stay in my house. And I'm very fortunate. I'm very lucky that I get to do that. Not a lot of people get to do that.
Yeah. And as an artist, what role do you think the arts play in educating people, bringing people together, on a good day, maybe changing hearts and minds? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
What role do the arts play in this narrative, in this conversation?
We are one of the leading players in this. Like, we're a pretty big role. I think in terms of education, people come to us when we don't understand things, and then they sit there for an hour and a half and we think about it together. I think we're also providing medicine. For the first 2 weeks of the pandemic, I was really depressed because for me, I was like, there are people going to the hospitals and stuff and they're saving lives, and I'm just here writing. And then I started realizing, there are people out there whose lives have been saved by art. There are people out there who have had to work things out, and the only thing that helped them figure it out was a play. And so for me, I started realizing what I do is another type of medicine. What I do is another type of healing. I can't operate like, I'm not equating what I do with being a doctor, absolutely not. But what I do is very important and has value. And I think we as artists and we as supporters and patrons of the arts, we need to keep that alive because that's what's gonna unite us. And, when this all ends, like, how are we gonna think about this? How are we going to cope? How are we going to grieve? It's gonna be through the art.
Well, and even now you see people leaning on the arts so much for comfort
Yeah.
and to cope through this.
Yeah.
And that's what I find really exciting. I just hope that interest level translates to funding and audiences when this is over. I mean, it's great that you can watch, a national theater production for 10 pounds or whatever it is, but
Yeah.
when we're actually being asked to sit in the seats again and pay ticket prices,
Yeah.
my hope is people will show up
Yeah.
to
I
the
think,
theater when
yeah.
it's safe to do so, obviously, when it's safe.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's the scary thing is we don't know when. Like Broadway, I think today just said that they wouldn't open until September.
After like,
Yeah.
okay.
And
Now you were commissioned by the Lyric Stage in Boston to pen a short play, Garden State, which is
yes,
their Play at Home series, which is a series of short plays that folks can perform in their own homes, which is really kind of cool, actually. So is that, and I know that you were playing with Instagram. I saw something on your Instagram stories where it looks like you were kind of performing this short play, short piece, playing with the technology, which I kind of love. Are these some of the trends that we're going to see going forward in theater, at least short term? And is that exciting to you as a playwright, playing with all this new technology and new ways of telling stories, or is it frustrating that we can't be doing it the traditional way?
I definitely was frustrated. I think it's a process. Like for the first couple of weeks, I was like, well, I'm frustrated and I'm not going to do anything. But now I'm like, okay, I'm frustrated. I guess I'm going to figure this out and try to adapt. that's definitely like where my mind's at now. Trying to figure out how we can continue, you know, evolving. Like, isn't that like Darwin had something to do about that, right? So, you know, I think it is exciting. To me, I'm excited now. You know, I hope and pray for the day when we all get to go back and we all get to be in seats and look at plays. But I also understand that that is not now. And so what can I do right now to sort of keep going? You know, like I'm a writer. I write for the stage, you know. And so right now, like I'm just trying to figure out what can I do to bring people together, you know. And so Lyric Stage Company of Boston, they commissioned me to make this, and it was so fun because I got to like write this play, and they were like, "Well, keep it, you know, keep it kid friendly because like we want people to do this in their homes." And for me, I was like, "Amazing! I'll put as many puns as I can," you know. And so that's what was really fun about it is like I'm hopeful that people are going to be doing this in their homes, you know, and like as somebody who like really loves like bees and bumblebees and stuff, I wanted to do that because I know kids are afraid of bees. And so for me, I was like, maybe if they see them as like, you know, personified creatures, like they'll be like less afraid of them. And so I think right now, you know, I'm a community driven playwright. And so what can I do for my community? I can provide them little things online. You know, the 10-minute thing I did last night, you know, I had someone text me and they were like, hey, that was really funny and I laughed a lot. And like, that's really like hard to come by right now. You know, and for me, I like sent that to the person who was acting with me and I was like, hey, we did something good today, you know.
I love that. So, what is on your pandemic playlist? What kind of what are you listening to, or what are you binge watching?
um I am binge listening to Six the musical on repeat. I love Six the musical so much. Um like so much. I'm also watching. So what I'm watching RuPaul's Drag Race. I love RuPaul's Drag Race. I just started Game of Thrones for the first time, and I'm on season 4 now. So I'm really getting into these like long series because I'm like, okay, like now, like okay, pandemic, I see you. Let's watch stuff. I'm watching and then okay, this is funny, Lauren, because I like kind of lean in to like the craziness. So like I'm watching The Walking Dead with my dad. And then there's this documentary series on Netflix that I watched called Pandemic. And like if you are like trying to escape this stuff and not like know anything about it, you don't watch Pandemic because this documentary series like came onto Netflix like a month or two before COVID-19 happened, and it's about finding the next pandemic. And so like it's really amazing to kind of watch these incredible medical professionals like talk about it and like, you know, how are we going to figure this out? And while we're in it, you know, there were so many times where I was like, oh my God, we're in it, you know, and I think I like needed that. So if you need that, check it out, but like definitely don't check it out if you don't want that.
So no Tiger King. You haven't succumbed
Oh,
to
yes,
anything?
I watched Tiger King. Hey, all you cool cats and kittens.
Oh my goodness. Who knew? Who knew this is where our world would go? This is what the world would
Truly.
be. Um,
Yeah.
so what kind of new works from the playwriting perspective do you think we're going to see post pandemic? Are, like you said, as artists, as writers, you're in this living history, living it real time. Are we going to see a bunch of pandemic plays come out of this, or what kind of themes, what kind of stories are we going to see?
I
Contagion, the
mean,
musical? What are we
yeah,
seeing?
truly. We're definitely going to have pandemic plays. Like that's just like not a question. Like we are absolutely going to have some theaters premiering these plays that happened during COVID-19. What I'm going to find the most exciting are the plays where the atmosphere is COVID-19, but it's not about COVID-19. So it's sort of
Mm.
showing how we dealt with it at the time, what social distancing means and stuff like that. But they're going to do it through action. And so we're going to be focusing on like the people, because like I would love to see a play. I would love to see a play where COVID-19 is a part of it, but I don't want to just sit there and watch people like tell me everything that's happening that I already know, you know.
Yeah.
I want to know what a small business is going through. I want to know what a grocery store clerk is doing, I want to know about what police officers are doing and not doing. I there's so many layers to this that we can dive into without just being like, it's a play about the pandemic. That being that being said, I also think it's going to sway the other way too, where there's going to be a lot of work that has nothing to do with the pandemic, and it's going to be a lot. I hope it's going to be more fun stuff like Six. Like I kind of foresee it going in another direction of like, okay, we're all going to have fun. Like this is it, to sort of let us escape for a little bit.
Absolutely. We have a question from Facebook. Patty wants to know, do you think you'll write something about the lessons you've learned during quarantine? Or have there been any personal aha moments of growth?
Wow.
Well, something I find interesting because I have a 20-something-year-old son who's been living on his own for 2 years and now he's living with us full time.
Mm-hmm.
It's an adjustment for
Yeah.
all of us. So now you're home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, and any growth that you've and any things that you can share about what you've learned during
Yeah.
this quarantine?
I mean, I think the biggest thing is like family is so important. Like when the world is gone, and truly when the world is gone, where do you turn to? You turn to your family, whether that is your chosen family or the family you were born into. And my family is so accepting and supportive of me, and they've let me come back. And then I'm starting to be like, wow, my parents work really hard. And like that's something that I've like taken away from this, and being like, oh my god, my parents have worked so hard, and I'm so lucky to be in a family where we have dinner every night together, and we watch movies together, and there's that bond that I think is really important. And so what I've taken away, so one thing I've taken away from this pandemic, I'm going to give you two things. One thing is that you need to focus on the bonds you have with people, because when the pandemic happens and things like this happen, you're not going to have anything other than those relationships. And so you need to really cultivate those. The other thing is, I have learned that if I wear shoes, I am much more productive. So life hack to everybody out there, if you're having trouble being productive, put on shoes, because it makes you think you're going somewhere.
I love that. Is your
Right?
mom Lori? Is your mom's name Lori?
Yeah.
Okay, well, Lori, she's watching and she said you could write about how fun it was moving back home with your family, but I'm sure everything you just said about your family warms her heart, because as a mom, I'm like, oh, I hope my son is upstairs saying this same thing to somebody right now.
Aww. Yeah, no, I mean, they could have. I have another friend whose mom literally was like, no, you can't come home. No. And he was like, but I want to come home. And she was like, no, it's not safe. And like, that broke my heart to like hear him be like, I can't go home. My mom won't let me go home, And so like, I'm just really grateful that my parents were very supportive of me coming back.
Well, we are grateful for you. I think I told you, you have such a fan club. There have been so many
Aww.
and beautiful emojis on here. You'll have to look at the comments
Yes, I
after.
will.
Your family's on here too, which is really sweet.
Oh my god, they're probably in the other room. That's so funny.
But I've enjoyed chatting with you so much, and before you go back to New York, and after this thing is over and we can get together, I still want to meet you in person. We'll have
Yes,
to talk about plays, talk about theater, talk about life, talk about anything, but you're just such a ray
absolutely.
of sunshine, and I'm so
Thanks.
excited to watch where your career takes off. I mean, it's just so exciting, just the small snippets. You haven't written that much, and everything you've written has been so well received. So it's amazing to watch you
Thank
grow as an
you.
artist.
Thank you so much. Oh, thank you so much. I like, it's like, it's amazing how many people are supportive, and like how many people will help you. I think like that's something that has stuck with me ever since I like started playing video games is like the power through friendship is like what is going to get us through everything. And so like that's why I love my friends and that's why I love my family so much because without them I'm just a crazy guy writing on paper, and so like thank you, Lauren, for bringing me on the show. Thank you to everybody who's watching. Like, I didn't, when I was like the crazy kid in the corner of my apartment in Ann Arbor, like writing something, I did not realize like this is what would happen. And so that's why I continue to write because I see what it does, you know, it's not about me.
I love that so much. Well, Grace says they're upstairs and they've trapped the dog in there. They've trapped the dog in there as well. So go let your family out of the room so they don't have to be trapped upstairs anymore.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Stay safe, stay healthy, keep writing, and I just can't wait to meet you and see what happens for you next. This is so exciting.
Thank you so much, Lauren.
And thank you everyone for watching. Come back tomorrow at 8 p.m. and we have to go a little later because the writer I'm speaking to another writer who used to be the chief reviewer for the Seattle Times, and she's based in Seattle. Her name is Misha Burson, and she's written this beautiful book about West Side Story. And since we can't seem to get enough of West Side Story, we're going to spend some time with her talking about it. So,
Yes.
um, come back tomorrow night at 8 p.m. right here on Facebook Live. Thank you, Sam. Go rescue your family from the upstairs.
I shall. See you later, Lauren.
See you soon. Bye bye.
Bye. Bye, y'all.